Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Our next story takes us to the British Army, where our OP is doing the impossible, single-handedly organizing vehicles, equipment, and fuel logistics for an entire 5-week squadron exercise. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Officer ignores expert advice, faces humiliating consequences. So this happened a few years ago, and I'm going to have to keep some parts vague as the officer in question is still a serving member of the British Armed Forces. When I was in the Army, I worked with one boss, a sergeant most days. He had to go on a long course, meaning all of his responsibilities for 3 months were passed down to me, a private. It sounds ridiculous, but it worked out nicely. Other sergeants from other troops would help me out and pick up some of his slack. I was tasked with organizing transport and vehicles for an entire squadron for 5 weeks. This included making sure the vehicles were fit to travel and stay out for 5 weeks, along with ensuring there was enough fuel for generators to run a comms HQ. Everything was running perfectly with 4 days to go. On the Thursday before we left, all the vehicles were lined up neatly on the parade square. All the equipment was loaded safely and accounted for. I'd done my inspections and had a sergeant do a second one, so we were both happy. We also had a 7,000-liter fuel tanker full and ready for the 5 weeks up there. There was an officer in charge of this exercise who always felt the need to prove himself to people. He came up and was immediately annoyed I had a fuel tanker. He said it would get stuck and insisted we use packed fuel instead. Totally ignoring my opinion as a professional driver, he insisted we take packed fuel and said we could carry enough on one fuel truck. He also claimed he'd sent an email to my boss 2 weeks ago, but I can't read my boss's emails. This was a real pain, but I made it happen. It was massively difficult to get that much fuel on short notice, but I pulled a few favors and managed to get a truck full of 20-liter jerry cans totaling 5,600 liters of fuel. We needed about 185 liters a day, which came to about 6,500 liters total, but I didn't tell him that. He was pleased as punch that he got his way. The officer left with the first packet of vehicles, and I went back to my office and sent him an email explaining the fuel shortage situation, knowing he wouldn't see it until he got back. Fast forward to the last week of the exercise with about 3 days to go. I'm sitting playing PS2 with one of the electricians when this officer comes bursting in and shouting, "Where the F is the fuel delivery for this morning? The generators are about to shut down and the chief of staff is here in 3 hours." I didn't know this, but apparently it was organized for the chief of staff to come down and view our comms HQ. There's no fuel. We ran out yesterday. Angry, incomprehensible gibberish. Sir, you insisted on taking packed fuel instead of a tanker. The 6-ton trucks can't take enough fuel for this exercise. I tried telling you and even sent an email. Cue the smuggest look of my entire life. More angry shouting and calling me a B-word. The fuel tanker I organized arrived about an hour and a half later than I planned, just in time to top up the generators and our fuel tanks so the vehicles could drive back and we had enough fuel for the rest of the exercise. Literally just in time for the chief of staff's visit. That was the best hour and a half of my life, watching this idiot officer shout and stress out at everyone, spitting feathers because he knew he'd messed up. I wasn't going to let an entire squadron look stupid because of one idiot, so I did go against the compliance a little bit, but at the end of this whole 5-week drama, I got a commendation for my efforts, and the officer made himself look like a total jerk in front of an entire squadron. Once everyone heard what happened, he looked even worse in front of the entire regiment. That officer sounded like a jerk that needed to be put in their place by a private. Can you imagine what his fellow officers were saying about him? And how you effectively saved the day? Either way, you sound like a solid dude, and any service would be proud to have you. And our second story. Boss hated us saying "baby sharp," so naturally, I put it on a hat. Years ago, I worked in the prep kitchen for a small chain of restaurants. For background, when you pick up a knife in a restaurant kitchen, you're supposed to say "sharp" pretty loudly so that other people rushing around know someone is walking around with a knife. Anyways, we had 2 kinds of knives, large chef's knives and paring knives. There were only a few paring knives, not enough for everyone to have one at their station. At some point, one of my coworkers started referring to the knives as sharps, and so I started calling the paring knives baby sharps, and it caught on. This led to people asking across the room, "Who's got a baby sharp?" Now, my boss was such a massive bee. She, for some unknown reason, didn't like us calling the paring knives baby sharps and said so on a few occasions, but nobody cared. To be clear, nobody ever said or sang baby sharp do or anything like that. Well, one day she was in a particularly bad mood and yelled at us, "Nobody's allowed to say baby sharp anymore." That afternoon, I went home and photoshopped a little cartoon face, bonnet, pacifier, and diaper onto an image of a paring knife. I took the image to a custom print shop and had them print it on a baseball cap. We were required to wear hats at work to keep stray hairs from falling into the food. I only worked there a couple months after this because I found a better job, but you better believe I wore that baby sharp hat to work the next day, and then every day for the remainder of my time there. The boss never said anything to me about it, but I know it pissed her off. Well done. And thank you for your service to all of us who've ever worked under unnecessarily grumpy managers. And our next story. Call center bosses get humiliated by employees' clever revenge. So a bit of context first. I worked at a call center for an insurance company. I was a sales and service consultant looking to move up within the company, so I was always looking to complete additional tasks to improve my chances on gaining the next promotion. As some of you may know, call centers are usually quite toxic and involve micromanaging employees until they hate themselves. This call center was no different. One of the biggest company focuses at the time was our online self-service center. Basically, it was to assist customers in moving their transactions online so that we didn't have 1,000 calls a day asking for something small such as a change of registration number or updating the address their vehicle was parked at. Consultants were required to promote, read force feed, the SSC to every customer on every call. In the office was roughly 13 team leaders as well as a senior manager. Each team had roughly 10 to 15 people, so altogether there was about 150 to 200 people on the floor. Each team leader had their own idea of how it should be promoted and forced that ideology down the throat of their consultants. The most common process was to promote it immediately at the start of the call. You can imagine this was a mess, as you call your insurance company for help and they tell you to jump online before they even discuss or acknowledge your call, which is frankly extremely rude customer service. Additionally, the consultants never received proper training for the SSC, so they were not 100% sure of what processes you could and could not complete online. So no matter what the customer called for, the consultant would tell them at the start of the call they could complete it online. Now back to me completing additional tasks. I decided to take ownership of the SSC and help educate my fellow consultants on how we could better promote the online service. I had lengthy conversations with consultants to determine why they were uncomfortable promoting the SSC, and big surprise, there were two main reasons. They felt it was rude to promote it at the start of the call, and they didn't know what process you could complete online. I organized a presentation with the team leaders and discussed my findings and asked for their thoughts. I was greeted with a fair bit of tirade, which went along the lines of, "We've taught our consultants the right way. You're just a consultant yourself, so we know better than you do, and until you prove otherwise, we won't listen to your suggestions at all." I had a chat with the senior manager, and I told him that the reason we were experiencing low digital promotion numbers were because the team leaders did not understand the capabilities of the SSC and were forcing consultants to promote the service even if you're not sure if their request could be completed online. His exact words were, "Prove it, and I'll take your side on this." I waited until the next big presentation, which included the senior manager, team leaders, and all of their consultants. I requested 10 minutes for a quick presentation on the SSC, and my senior manager agreed without asking what I was planning to do. So I created a 20-question true-false quiz on the functionality and capability of the SSC and handed one copy and a pen to each of the team leaders and asked them to fill it in quickly. The look of horror on each of their faces as they received the quiz and realized they knew nothing about the SSC was amazing to see. Their consultants were all smiling ear to ear as they could see the point I was trying to prove. 10 minutes later, I read out the answers and got the team leaders to mark the sheet of the person seated next to them. It wasn't a surprise when they read out the name of the team leader and their score. None of them scored more than 10 out of 20. The senior manager was seated in the corner of the room with a little smile on his face as he watched all this unfold. He had a chat to me afterwards and let me go through with the presentation I'd planned for the SSC. Digital promotion numbers increased from 13% to 85% within the space of a week. And our last story. HOA cop. The joys of small-town living. Fresh air, homemade pies, and the kind of neighborly feuds that make reality TV look tame. Let me introduce you to Bob. Bob is your textbook retired cop, or so he claimed. About 65, bald enough to reflect sunlight like a signal mirror, and built like someone who never met a donut he didn't like. His gut led the way by a good 3 feet, and he walked like every step was a reminder of his former glory days. Now, in our little slice of rural paradise, we've all learned to tolerate Bob, the self-declared sheriff of our local HOA. The thing is, I'm not part of that HOA. Never was, never will be. My property, my rules. But to Bob, that was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Why the hell is your grass so high? You can't park 3 damn cars in your own driveway. That shed, it's not HOA approved. Classic Bob, constantly barking orders like he still had a badge and backup. Then one day I noticed something fishy. My gas kept disappearing. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make me raise an eyebrow. My truck hadn't moved in days, yet the gas gauge dropped like it owed someone money. I had a pretty good idea who the culprit was, but instead of confronting him, I decided to get clever. Now, most people would go for the old fill the can with water trick, but I wanted something spicier. So I mixed a generous splash of acetone into a can of gasoline, enough to torch a fuel injector or two, but not enough to make the truck explode. Just a little mechanical justice. I set the bait right by the garage, front and center. Next morning, it was like watching a sitcom in real life. Bob's pickup was growling, sputtering, smoking like a chimney in December. He was pacing, cursing, red-faced, and looking like he was about to combust himself. I strolled out, coffee in hand, and asked with the sweetest tone I could muster, "Morning, Bob. Trouble with the truck?" He spun around, eyes blazing. "What the hell did you put in that gas can? My engine shot." I played dumb, naturally. "What gas can?" "Oh, you mean the one sitting on my property?" "Thought it was just regular old fuel." Bob clenched his jaw and called for a tow. A few days later, word got out. He'd burned out parts of the fuel system, major repairs, thousands of dollars. His pickup still sits there, dead in the driveway, like a rusting monument to karma. It's been over 5 years now. The HOA folks avoid me like I've got the plague. And Bob, he doesn't bark so much these days. But every time he walks past my house, he gives a long, suspicious stare at any gas can near my garage. And you know what? That little victory never fails to make my day. Oh, and one more thing. I always wondered how a former cop could justify stealing gas from a neighbor. Seemed off. One day, I told the story to a friend of my dad's, and he laughed so hard he almost choked. "Bob? A cop? Hell no. That guy was never on the force. He spent his whole life working mall security." So yeah, turns out Officer Bob was just Rent-A-Cop Bob all along. Guess that explains the fake badge and the real entitlement. That explains a lot. The man clearly had nothing better to do. Now he can spend his endless free time fixing his pickup truck. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.